Hello, I am taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo published game. Welcome to the next episode. The next game is 1942. Last week, we took a look at Russian Attack, an NES game that was ported to the PlayChoice 10 in July of 1987. As I showed in that video, there was another third-party game released on the PlayChoice 10 at the same time, 1942. Similar to Russian Attack, this game was originally an arcade title that was ported to the NES, then back to the arcades on the PlayChoice 10. However, unlike Russian Attack, this one wasn't made by Konami. In fact, the original arcade machine was made by a developer we haven't looked at all, Capcom. When Capcom first released 1942 in the arcades in 1984, they were actually a pretty new company. However, Capcom's history intertwines with another company we have looked at, IREM. In fact, both IREM and Capcom have the same founder, Kenzo Sugimoto. Initially, Sugimoto worked on cotton candy machines, but apparently, after witnessing how prolific the pachinko market was, he saw a lot of potential with the entertainment business. He then founded a company called IPM, which stood for International Playing Machine, and it focused on manufacturing, selling, and renting arcade cabinets. Humorously, like Nintendo, one of their first arcade originals was a Space Invaders ripoff, with IPM's game being even more shameless than Nintendo's. Anyway, in 1979, IPM changed its name to IREM. Allegedly, this name change happened because they received a letter from IBM that said their names were too similar and would cause confusion. However, I couldn't track down the original Japanese news article this information comes from, so take that story with a grain of salt. IREM ended up being acquired by a company called the Nanao Corporation, and after lackluster sales, Sugimoto was removed as the president. According to Sugimoto, he left IREM for reasons he described as having problems with the way they managed things. Instead, he turned to another business he had started while he was president of IREM, the IRM Corporation, along with its subsidiary, Japanese Capsule Computers. These companies primarily focused on manufacturing and distributing arcade machines, so Sugimoto then also founded Capcom, which was to focus on selling software. The name Capcom came from the name Capsule Computers, and eventually IRM merged with Capcom to become the Capcom we know today. While it wasn't Capcom's first video game, one of their first big hits was 1942, a World War II themed shoot-'em-up released in 1984. This game was designed heavily with the Western market in mind, with the player actually controlling an American ship attacking Japan. Kind of surprising for a Japanese company. The arcade machine was a pretty big hit for Capcom, prompting them to make their first ever home console title, a port of 1942 to the Famicom. The port was believed to have been developed by a company called Micronix. While we don't know much about Micronix, a quick search around the web will tell you that people don't exactly hold Micronix with high regards. The company is retroactively known for making some pretty poor arcade ports to the Famicom, and 1942 is no exception. Apparently, there are rumors that Micronix was actually founded by a college student who barely even tested the ports he made. Despite the harsh retrospective opinions on the port, the game reportedly still sold over 1 million copies, which is no small number for a new company like Capcom. Eventually, the NES version of 1942 made its way back to the arcades on the PlayChoice 10 alongside Konami's Russian Attack in 1987. So, is this port as bad as they say? Let's find out. Now, I actually had heard of this version of the game before, but it was because of one aspect in particular, the music. Right when you get started, you are treated to an absolutely majestic musical piece, and luckily for you, you get to hear it pretty much non-stop for the entirety of the game. Jokes aside, this was the creator's attempt to replicate the music of the original arcade machine, which was imitating the sounds of a snare drum and a whistle. I'm not sure exactly how much easier it would be to make a better version of this music on the NES considering its limited sound font, but it's undeniably pretty terrible. Anyway, when starting, the game says last 32 stage, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but basically this just tells you how many more stages there are to go. That's right, this game has 32 levels. Let's hope it has infinite continues. At its core, the game is a pretty straightforward vertical scrolling shoot-'em-up. You pilot some kind of aircraft and fight off waves of enemy planes. Most of them are these small planes that fly around and shoot occasional attacks at you. However, sometimes there are bigger ships too. These ones take more hits to destroy, and often they will appear from below, limiting your movement options. Sometimes there are these yellowish ships in a formation, and destroying them will grant you a power-up. There's a bunch of different possible power-ups you can get, and I think the type of power-up is indicated by the color, but I never really learned which power-up was which. Two of these were upgrades, with one increasing the amount of attacks you could fire at once, while the other adds wingmen to your sides that give you additional firepower. These wingmen guys always fly in from above, and sometimes I thought they were enemy ships flying at me and freaked out for no good reason. Whoa! Oh, those are my guys. I was like, what are those things flying at me? These two upgrades aren't the only types of power-ups. There's one that destroys every enemy on screen, another that just gives you some points, and one that gives you an extra loop. What's a loop? Well, it's a move you can do to temporarily become invulnerable to enemy attacks. You can only do this maneuver a limited amount of times, as indicated by the number on the bottom right. Honestly, I didn't find this move to be all that great. I tried to get good at using it to get out of tricky situations, but since it doesn't damage the other ships or anything, it's not like the spot I would end up in was typically that much better. Oh, you can also rarely find Capcom's staple Yashi-Chi item, and in this game it just gives you a ton of points. These power-ups can sometimes be pretty sparse, and after getting my first upgrade, I got hit immediately and lost it. Whoops. Luckily, I found the same power-up again soon after though. Eventually, I reached an aircraft carrier which signaled the end of the stage. For some reason, once you get close enough, all the enemy ships on screen just blow up. Why did they even spawn these guys in so close to the end? The next handful of stages were all pretty similar to stage 1. I don't think they were exactly the same, but I just kept flying over the ocean, fighting off waves and waves of enemy planes. Eventually though, I reached a stage that had a bunch of land. I kind of like how the land backgrounds look in this game, although sometimes in sections with a lot of sand, the enemy attacks blend in too well with it. At this point, it more or less seemed like I had seen everything the game had to offer. However, there was one last surprise waiting for me at the end of stage 8. A boss. This thing is a huge plane that just sprays you with bullets. It's a bit chaotic, but I took him down on my first try. I kind of just focused on dodging and my bullets eventually took him out. This boss is reused a couple of times throughout the game, and in a later fight, I tried hiding up close to one of its wings, but I still got shot at from there. While this was only 1/4 of the way through all of the stages, there's not a whole lot more to talk about. There were more varieties of backgrounds as I proceeded forward, and the game definitely got increasingly hectic as I went on, but at this point, all there was to it was fighting off waves of airplanes and an occasional boss. Eventually though, when I had 11 stages left, I finally got a game over, but thankfully the game lets you continue on whatever stage you got a game over on. Phew. As the number of stages reached the single digits, I seemed to start flying over cities of some kind. Is this supposed to be Tokyo or something? Man, I still kind of can't believe this was made by Japanese developers. Finally, on the second to last level, I encountered the big airship one last time. While I did lose a life to it, it's not any more difficult than usual, so it didn't take me long to get through it. If they used one of those bosses for the second to last level, what are they saving for the last one? Well, it turns out absolutely nothing. The final level was an extremely calm level over the ocean with no boss or anything. I actually thought the game had already looped at this point, but you get the congratulations screen and everything afterwards. Kind of a letdown. Maybe it was just supposed to represent your flight home from Japan? Anyway, with that, 1942 was complete. On to the review. So, was this game as bad as they say? Well, it certainly wasn't great, but I didn't hate it or anything either. The music was pretty terrible. I guess the way the enemy bullets blended in with the beach background wasn't great either. The frame rate got pretty bad at times too, although that isn't too uncommon for NES games that get hectic like this. Maybe it's more of a testament to the original arcade machine, but the foundations of the game are still solid, and it can be fun to weave around the enemies and obstacles thrown at you. That being said, it does feel a bit too simple, and the power-ups in particular feel a bit bland. By the 32nd level, it was really starting to feel repetitive, especially when you compare it to something like Gradius or R-Type. To be fair to the original arcade machine though, it does predate both of those titles, although not by much in the case of Gradius. It's a bit tough for me to say how good of a port this game is since I haven't actually played the original game, but overall my feelings on the game are a bit mixed. I didn't hate my time with it, but I got bored of it pretty quickly. I gave the game a 5 out of 10. With 1942 complete, I have now finished 53 out of the 148 NES games in the challenge, meaning I am now 35.81% of the way through all of the NES games. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.